Hey guys, tonight we're going to unveil the never-before-told secrets of how Victorian women, beneath those smooth layers of silk, intricate lace embroidery, and glittering jewels, lies an entire world of blood, urine, and enforced silence. Can you even imagine wearing an iron cage corset that crushes your ribs? A waist so constricted you can't take a full breath, and a skirt as voluminous as a tiny room, yet still forced to smile gracefully? And when nature calls, oh no. Let me tell you, you wouldn't survive a second if you had to face it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you are and what your local time is. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As revealed in the introduction, we now draw back the curtain on the ornate facade of the Victorian era to step into the hidden world. Beneath the flickering glow of chandeliers and gilded mirrors, Victorian women appeared as graceful as fairies in a palace. Yet just beyond those layers of smooth silk, intricate lace embroidery, and glittering gems lay a starkly contrasting scene: damp menstrual blood, trickling urine, and the oppressive atmosphere of enforced silence. Rather than being treated as human beings with the most natural needs, they were imprisoned by etiquette, turning every movement into a dramatic ritual. First came the corset, an iron cage that encased the chest and hips so tightly its wearer could barely draw a full breath. Though designed to sculpt the figure and create a tiny waist, in reality it prevented deep breathing, caused a dizziness, chest pain, and forced women to learn to endure every discomfort. Imagine that even a single normal breath becomes a monumental challenge, all while you must keep a poised smile on your lips. Outside the corset was the enormous crinoline frame, which flared the skirt out like a moving stretcher, preventing anyone from coming too close. Yet this very structure turned its wearer into a slave to the heavy fabric, placing tremendous pressure on the spine and hips, so that each step felt like a painful curse. In contrast, today, a lightweight skirt can float freely in the breeze. Victorian women exchanged freedom of movement for a veneer of grandeur. Regarding basic bodily needs, they had no private lavatories. Every grand home merely concealed chamber pots within decorative chairs or tucked them onto back porches. When the urge struck, you know what I mean, they had to find a secluded corner, curl up in a cramped space, and hold their breath to avoid making a sound. Today, we simply step into a bathroom, close the door, draw the curtain, and breathe a sigh of relief. Menstruation arrived unannounced, and the only materials at hand were rag scraps, dried moss, even straw unsanitary, abrasivi, and prone to causing infection. A single bloodstain exposed could doom a woman's reputation. For society deemed menstrual blood filthy and unmentionable, today, tampons, sanitary pads, and menstrual cups afford women exponentially greater comfort and hygiene. The body was treated as a trivial subject, unfit for public discussion. From a young age, women learned to remain silent. They dared not utter menstruation or mention urination. They isolated themselves from the pain and the musty odors in order to preserve their virtue in society's eyes. Thus, behind every graceful step on velvet floors and every proud smile lay a series of harrowing trials. Victorian women endured a hidden world where natural physiology was cast as sin and silence was the unspoken law. Let us continue this journey of discovery to better appreciate the value of the freedoms we enjoy today. The moment those glorious garments are lifted, yet another mystery of Victorian women emerges. They wore no underwear as we know it. Throughout the 19th century, women's fashions focused entirely on outer coverage, while neglecting basic needs beneath. Skirts ballooned out like hot air balloons, seemingly sufficient to conceal everything. Yet when a gentle breeze swept through, the swirling fabric revealed the scandalous truth underneath. Not a scrap of protective cloth. There lay bare flesh beneath 3 to 4 cumbersome layers of petticoats, with no panties or supportive undergarment in sight. That sudden gust of wind prompted polite society to ask, might there be something to preserve a woman's private region without ruining the elaborate silhouette? Yet the motivation was not truly for women's comfort, but to spare men's eyes and protect family reputations. The compromise was the invention of split drawers, 2 separate leg pouches joined at the waist, leaving a wide gap at the crotch. Split drawers were tailored as 2 pant legs fused at the waist, yet conspicuously open between the legs. With them, a woman need not remove her entire corset and weighty skirt merely to relieve herself or manage her menstrual flow. She simply bent forward, parted the 2 leg tubes like stage curtains, and finished her business in a hush of fabric. Though seemingly convenient, split drawers offered no absorbency or real protection, merely a flimsy veil. The thin fabric lacked any waterproof lining, so during a menstrual period, or when voiding the bladder, blood or urine still seeped through to the outer petticoat. Under a tightly laced corset, such visible dampness was not only inconvenient, but a threat to one's reputation. A stain on an otherwise grand gown could spark gossip, implying poor etiquette or lack of dignity. To conceal leaks, women had to stuff split drawers with extra cloths, rag scraps, or drietmos, then discreetly clean themselves in silence. This facet of split drawers revealed society's astounding indifference to women's real needs. These garments were not meant for care, but as props to uphold the appearance of decorum and prevent women from offending male sensibilities, compared to today when underwear is designed to fit snugly, with moisture-wicking, antibacterial fabrics that respect the body and promote health. Split drawers are utterly useless scraps of cloth. Imagine struggling within a corset and tens of kilograms of skirt, only to don fragile split drawers and wonder how many layers of rough cloth are needed to stave off embarrassing stains. It was nothing less than binding women into their attire without addressing fundamental needs, and split drawers did not remain static in their original form. By the end of the century, some dressmakers added small panels to line the crotch, yet still retained the 2-leg gap. This only made the exterior seem more modest, without truly solving the problem of restroom use or menstrual management. Many 19th century women still had to stealthily unlace their corsets, huddle in a hidden corner to relieve themselves, then painstakingly reassemble all layers of split drawers, petticoats, and corset before re-entering the ceremony. Split drawers also stand as clear evidence of gender inequality. Society cared only to keep men's eyes clean while ignoring women's health. It forgot that menstruation and elimination are natural physiological needs deserving full support. Instead of investing in genuinely functional undergarments, people obsessed over decorative details: lace trim, high collars, puffed sleeves, pleats that beautified the exterior but served no real purpose. More bitter still, split drawers were once hailed as the pinnacle of women's underwear technology and sold at exorbitant prices to the elite. People boasted of split drawers made from rare mulberry silk, yet dared not mention the intolerable inconvenience in use. They praised this invention as enabling ladies to maintain refined manners, even in private moments. Yet no one spoke the truth. It proved that women were not allowed to exist with their full range of needs. The lesson of split drawers shows that if a society cares only about appearances and ignores human needs, even the most elaborate inventions remain superficial and fail to address root issues. Victorian women endured split drawers, underwear that was not underwear. Only more hindrance when they could have received comprehensive care. And that is the story of split drawers, 2-legged, open crotch garments, emblematic of a civilization that neglected women's genuine needs and treated them as props for outward elegance. When a sudden breeze blew, split drawers momentarily shielded prying eyes, but could not conceal the suffering within. They stand as proof of an era that prized silence and spectacle above women's health and rights. Continuing from those hidden corners, we now step into the grand hall, where the splendid ball is not merely a dance, but a painful sentence for every step of a Victorian woman. Imagine draping yourself in a corset that compresses your ribs so tightly you can scarcely breathe. 3 layers of stiff petticoats, like iron frames, and a massive crinoline that could knock over a chair with a single turn. Your waist is cinched so firmly that drawing a full breath feels impossible. Yet you must still smile beneath the chandelier's glow, the scent of roses mingling with beeswax smoke, and the gentle hum of a violin. Though your breaths come in ragged gasps, your heart pounds wildly, and your chest feels ready to burst. You are compelled to maintain perfect poise, spinning, curtsying, and stepping lightly as if you were no more than a decorative figure. When the music shifts, a sudden urge whether to urinate or a menstrual cramp strikes without warning. You dart your eyes around hallway, side door, hidden corner behind a pillar, but find no escape. Each passing second becomes torture. You must silently summon every ounce of pelvic floor strength. Heave that 15-kilogram weight of fabric around your hips, and find somewhere to relieve yourself. Every upward tug on the skirt, every bend of the body causes sweat to bead on your brow, muscles to ache, and your heart to flutter uncontrollably. Meanwhile, every gaze from aristocrats to attendants is fixed on the delicate grace of the Princess Victoria. The monarchy exalts outward appearance, religion veneratis, purity, yet scarcely anyone acknowledges the silent suffering beneath those gowns. Etiquette itself binds women into silence. To complain is forbidden. To show any sign of weakness is unthinkable. Weakness is equated with a loss of dignity, and anyone who betrays the slightest hint of pain risks censure or even social exile. That is why everyone keeps their distance, not out of courtesy, but out of fear of hearing an unexpected sound. The ladies in waiting stand discreetly at the edges, eyes cast down toward the hem of your skirt, ready to lend silent aid when needed. They know you are in distress, yet they may only follow the protocol. Gently lift the skirt, quietly position a chamber pot or urinal, and then close the door again as if nothing has occurred, permitting you to rejoin the dance as though untouched by pain. The ballroom is not simply a celebration. It is a stage for ceremony and power. Every twirl must be flawless, no grimace. No hint of discomfort may mar the performance. Women face an agonizing contradiction. Maintain an image of elegance, even as personal torment rages within. There are moments when their faces grow ashen, their legs tremble, yet they continue to spin and curtsy to the assembled guests, as though their bodies were no more than silent props. By contrast, today we enjoy private restrooms within the same building, sometimes even within our own apartments, silent flush toilets, soft toilet paper, and convenient sanitary products. We can slip away from a gathering, close a door behind us, and attend to our needs unseen. For Victorian women, even a single second of grasping a doorknob to a hidden chamber would have felt like an unimaginable luxury. Yet in the world of crinolines and corsets, women surrendered not only physical freedom, but control over their own bodies. A sudden urge became terror, not because of a natural need, but because it threatened to break protocol and shatter the illusion of refinement. They learned to suppress, to swallow their complaints, to hold their breath and endure until the last possible moment, just to avoid interrupting the perfect performance. That suffocating pressure, combined with menstrual cramps intensified by the corset's constriction, led many Victorian women to feign headaches or stomach aches and decline attendance at balls during those days, or when the pain became unbearable. Even so, absence carried its own taboo, sometimes seen as disrespectful and damaging to one's social standing. Nevertheless, not every woman could evade the elaborate ritual of the ball, where each participant was expected to uphold the highest standards of appearance and decorum. The bravest among them, swallowed their pride, braced themselves, and stepped onto the ceremonial floor. Silently enduring each pang of agony, beneath those sumptuous gowns lay a myriad of hardships, maintaining posture, concealing any stains, suppressing urges, and ultimately managing personal needs with crude, makeshift materials. The pressures of the splendid ball reveal that Victorian women were not the ethereal nymphs we imagine, but silent warriors bearing pain to preserve their honoured image. When the need to urinate or menstruate struck mid-dance, they had no right to escape. They could only keep smiling, keep pivoting under the corset's strain, and continue suffering in the invisible cage of lace. And that, truly, is the portrait of the splendid ball in the Victorian age. Continuing our journey of discovery, let us turn our attention to the woman who became the defining icon of an entire era, to Queen Victoria, and to the true costs of the perfection she inspired. Queen Victoria was far more than a mere civic ruler. She embodied power, virtue, and moral authority. Her likeness appearing everywhere, on teacups bearing her portrait, on commemorative coins, and in grand oil paintings that adorned palaces and council chambers. Her attire, from the magnificent, voluminous gowns to the tightly laced corsets, was not simply clothing but a statement of power, a signal of status, and a moral exemplar. Women across the empire, from English ladies to Indian noblewomen, believed that by adopting her silhouette they would gain respectability and a sense of pure elegance. Yet behind each sumptuous layer lay a silent battle with the body to achieve that tiny waist. The Queen's corset, rumoured to contain hundreds of boning rods, had to be drawn in so tightly that she is said to have fainted after lengthy ceremonies. To maintain the dome-like shape of her skirts, the crinoline frame beneath was constructed of bent steel, making each rotation as laborious as climbing a steep hill. These garments subjected both the Queen and her court ladies to skin infections, bruises from metal chafing, and chronic musculoskeletal pain. Moreover, when the monthly menstrual cramps struck, the constricting corset interfered with circulation, heightening the risk of severe abdominal pain and digestive disorders. Rumour had it that some noble women quietly collapsed in their dressing rooms after persevering through a state banquet, determined above all to preserve the monarchy's dignity. Exhaustion, dizziness, and fainting were considered the price to pay for maintaining an unblemished image at a royal ball. Despite this agony, not a single complaint dared to break the solemn hush. Menstrual blood, physical discomfort, and abdominal pain were all deemed defects or stains beyond acknowledgement. A true lady was judged solely on her flawless observance of etiquette. The greater her endurance, the more graceful she appeared, and the more aristocratic she was deemed. Femininity in Victorian society meant the capacity to suppress suffering in silence, to wear a steadfast mask that concealed every smear and musty odour hidden beneath the outer garments. This pressure to embody perfection was not merely an individual health concern, but reflective of the era's entire medical system. Royal physicians were dispatched to attend the Queen, yet their simple treatment regimens, such as prescribing mild anaesthetics to help her sleep through the pain, could not address the root cause. Inhumane dress codes and ritualistic demands that forced the body into rebellion. By contrast, working-class women, experiencing the same strain, and had no access to royal medical care. They relied instead on local healers and herbal poultices that offered minimal relief and carried high risk of infection. The cost of perfection was measured not only in wealth, but in lifespan and dignity. Many court ladies, bound by rigid protocol, succumbed to debilitation, suffering from chronic respiratory infections caused by inhaling cold air through corset-compressed torsos, or enduring digestive issues from irregular meals, as they often skipped food to maintain their shape. Today's women can choose lightweight garments, move freely, schedule regular health checkups, and openly discuss concerns with community support. Victorian women, by contrast, were forced into silent submission, shouldering their burdens without complaint. Contemporary media, from newspapers to women's magazines, dared not publish images or accounts of such suffering for fear of tarnishing the Queen's picture of pure virtue. All information was censored, and only glowing illustrations of ceremonies and banquets were permitted to circulate. This policy reinforced the false notion that women were tireless and impervious to pain, merely required to smile and uphold decorum. Queen Victoria's unspoken authority inspired generation after generation of women to lace their corsets, arrange their crinolines, and whiten their faces with lead-based powder, all in pursuit of an unattainable ideal. Yet behind the velvet drapes and candle-lit glow, they paid with strained bones, with blood, and with endless silence. They transformed endurance into virtue, ritual into identity, only to bear the full consequences of a manufactured beauty. In that context, we come to appreciate more fully the freedoms we enjoy today, the ability to choose comfortable attire, to speak openly about health, and to refuse conformity to unspoken rules. Queen Victoria and the heavy price of her perfection stand as vivid testament to how public power and image often rest upon hidden sacrifices that only those who live them can truly understand. If split drawers were the spectacle that masked the outside, then the next great secret was how Victorian women relieved themselves in absolute silence. Beneath the weighty skirts and tightly laced corsets, Victorian women had to learn to become ghosts the moment they sought privacy. They practiced moving with the utmost delicacy, keeping themselves contained within the layers of dense fabric, and balancing on high-heeled shoes without so much as a creak. Every pivot, every step had to be precise, for even the slightest rustle could shatter the flawless illusion society demanded they maintain. The life-saving solution took the form of the women's chamber urinal, a long, oval vessel curved to fit snugly between the thighs. Crafted from metal or glazed porcelain, it had no lid to allow for swift operation. Its curved design directed streams of urine or menstrual fluid outward beneath the skirt, preventing any splashing back onto the wearer. With it, a woman could ease herself or manage her period without unfastening her corset or removing the cumbersome layers of her gown. She simply bent forward and clamped the vessel into place. At lavish balls, the royal household provided a private retiring room exclusively for women, no men. No officials attended, only by ladies and the maidservants. Draped in heavy velvet curtains, this room sat discreetly in a sumptuous alcove at the far side of the ballroom. There, a team of maidservants stood ready like nurses in a silent war zone. Clad in black and white uniforms, white gloves, and hairnets, they stood at rigid attention. Yet their work was performed in utter secrecy. When a princess felt the urge to relieve herself or endured menstrual cramps, one maid gently lifted her petticoats, another positioned the urinal correctly, and a third softly wiped the rim to prevent any stray drops from escaping. They whispered a few encouraging words. "Take your time, madam," so quietly that guests waiting outside the retiring room could not hear. In less than 10 seconds, the lady would depart the room, smooth her skirts, and glide back onto the dance floor as if nothing had happened. This secret was kept so rigorously that even guests standing at the threshold never suspected a thing. They only saw a lady disappear behind the velvet drapes and then reappear, her face radiant. To continue dancing, this was not genuine respect for a woman's body, but rather a refined art of concealing bodily functions that etiquette forbade from existing. Though adapted for women, the urinal's true purpose was not to promote health or comfort. It existed solely to preserve an elegant facade, to muffle the sound of water and footsteps. In practice, women still had to hold their breath, contract their pelvic muscles, and learn to anticipate the moment of flow in order to reach the retiring room in time. Beyond the ballroom, the chamber urinal accompanied women back to their private bedrooms or sitting rooms. In the dim lighting, they had to deftly slip their hand beneath the layers of skirt, remaining silent while maintaining a proper seated posture. Many noble women later recounted practicing before a mirror, familiarizing themselves with the sound of fluid entering the vessel to trick their own ears and avoid panic during those critical moments. However, not every woman could access the royal retiring room. In smaller noble households, the urinal was stored in a corner behind folding screens. Without the assistance of a dedicated maidservant, ladies and debutantes could rely only on a trusted housemaid, or, if none was available, they had to fumble alone beneath the layers of fabric, risking a broken corset or a spray of fluid onto the skirt, compared to today when we have closed, flushable toilets, automatic water jets, soft toilet paper, and convenient tampons or menstrual cups. Victorian women truly lived in a world where all sound had to be forbidden. They paid for it with the skill to remain utterly silent, and the art of vanishing for a brief moment to attend to the most basic of needs. This is the portrait of the secret art of silent relief, an indispensable yet never mentioned chapter of Victorian history. While audiences revelled in the glow of chandeliers and the sway of waltzes, no one knew that behind the sumptuous drapes lay an entire science of concealment, ensuring that a woman's body would never betray the crowd. And it is precisely that enforced silence which lays bare society's indifference to wholly natural human needs. When the secret of silent relief was kept under strict hush, the harshest challenge for Victorian women became their menstrual cycle, a nameless pain and the humble yet desperate tea bandage. Hic. Menstruation at that time was regarded as a curse, so taboo it had no name, no vocabulary, and no safe remedy. Women had no sanitary pads, no tampons, and certainly no modern painkillers. They faced their monthly red, clad in gowns weighing dozens of kilograms, drenched in sweat, as sudden cramps struck, yet no one dared utter the word menstruation. Who? Mothers and elder women in the family never offered guidance. Housemaids quietly tidied away, bloodstains hidden behind curtains, never permitted to ask questions or show concern. Their anxious whispers amounted only to one silent admonition: cover it up, let no one know. Thus, Victorian girls grew up haunted by the notion that their cycles were evil and must be concealed at all costs. From this grim reality sprang a resourceful invention: the tea bandage, a crude cuff of coarse cloth wound around the hips and between the thighs like a primitive bikini. Women cut and stitched thick cotton squares into multiple layers, wrapping them around the waist and tying them at the back as a makeshift absorbent. Inside this bandage, they tucked clean cloth scraps, dried moss gathered from gardens, warm wool scraps, or even dried grass. Anything capable of soaking up menstrual blood. These tea bandages had to be changed from 10 to 20 times each day, depending on the flow. After each use, a woman would untie the bandage, hand wash it thoroughly with coarse soap in a basin of cold water, then wring out the damp fabric and hang it in a darkened corner to air dry in secret. She had to time the sunshine precisely, drying it out of sight. And only when the cloth was fully dry would she dare tuck it away inside a tightly sealed wooden box. This process demanded enormous time and effort. Damp cloth bred mold quickly, leading to infections of the intimate area. Moss and wool could scratch sensitive skin, causing itching or prolonged inflammation. Victorian women risked their health merely to preserve family honour and social standing. If a stain ever peeked through the layers of skirt, a woman faced being deemed unladylike, even cast out of her family. Among the aristocracy, a debutante whose bloodstain showed on her dress risked lifelong scandal, ruining her reputation and marriage prospects. Society viewed menstrual blood as unclean, unworthy of the pure and virtuous image women were forced to project. Anxiety, shame, and exhaustion over menstruation formed an invisible sentence, a long chain of silence handed down from mother to daughter. A mother would whisper, "Don't let anyone know your time of the month," while a grandmother urged, "Endure it. Never let your annoyance affair." These secret tips were never recorded or taught. They existed only as a whispered oral tradition in the shadows. Yet through countless nights of exhausting bandage changes, Victorian women transformed the tea bandage into a trophy of resilience and ingenuity. They mastered the swiftest routines, learned to muffle the sound of cloth washing, and concealed used bandages until the next cycle began. Those small minds devised a silent system to resist the hypocrisy of their society. By contrast, today we need only tear open a sanitary pad wrapper, stick it to modern underwear and discard it, or insert a tampon and slip into lightweight pants. Victorian women endured far more: physical pain coupled with deep psychological humiliation. Silence about menstrual blood was the only way to survive in a world that placed strict etiquette above all else. This journey into the agony of menstruation and the tea bandage reveals that Victorian women lived in deprivation and isolation, yet also demonstrates their latent strength. They were forced to turn pain into secrecy, and that crude bandage into an invisible shield, known only to themselves and borne alone. When Victorian women had already endured every hidden physiological burden, another more poignant secret lay in wait: the past of gowns that were never, ever washed. Silk brocades, intricate lace, and thousands of decorative crystals could not withstand water or soap. Each laundering posed a perilous transformation. The fabric could shrink, the corset frame warp, hand-embroidered dyes fade, and delicate lace tear to shreds. Rather than risking a dip in a water tub, upper-class families opted to refresh garments with talcum powder or starch. A fine layer of powder would coat the fabric's surface, absorbing sweat and masking some odors. Yet it could never fully eliminate the haunting reminder of bodily scent. When a stain appeared, instead of washing, they used a soft bristled brush to gently lift away dry soil. The moisture-absorbing lining was removed, hand-washed in a small basin with coarse soap, then hung in the kitchen, alcove, or cellar to dry out of sight. The outer gown, however, was only refurbished 2 times a year, once in the spring to prepare for the grand balls, and once in the autumn before hunting season. The Great Wash was treated like a major festival, lasting an entire week. A parade of maidservants was assembled. Some tugged gowns down to the basement. Some scrubbed each sturdy lining, and others fanned and smoked the fabrics to dry. The smoke from burning coals was used to neutralize lingering odors, while hand fanning prevented sudden heat shrinkage. This process consumed tremendous energy, time, and above all labor, for a single misstep could ruin a garment weighing countless pounds. Meanwhile, men needed only a few lightweight suits, changed daily to stay fresh and tidy. And the women? They were imprisoned in their weighty dresses. No matter how much sweat, menstrual blood, or even excrement lurked within the layers of silk. For an entire month, or sometimes several months, no one dared disassemble the main gown. They silently endured every bit of dampness and bodily residue. These dresses were displayed as works of art, perfect down to the last stitch. But in truth they were cages, concealing every odor and secret of the body. A woman's dignity and social standing were measured by the number of fabric layers enveloping her, not by any small measure of comfort. The ultimate luxury equated to dehumanization. Women ceased to be seen as people with needs and feelings, becoming mere objects to behold, preserving an outwardly perfect facade. Even on days without formal ceremonies, women still wore heavy ball gowns or thick day dresses. When invited to tea or a light luncheon, they maintained the strict dress code. For a wardrobe change meant unfastening the corset and stripping away the carefully constructed image. Hanging a gown outdoors became taboo. Harsh sunlight would fade the fabric. Rain would leave it limp and stained, and a gust of wind could betray the dozen hidden truths sewn into the layers. Today, we have washing machines, fabric softeners, wrinkle-resistant technologies, and thousands of synthetic blends that can be laundered freely. Yet, when we think of Victorian women, We truly appreciate all those conveniences. They traded both health and personal dignity to don gowns that never felt clean, solely to uphold an image of grace and perfection in polite society. The effort to maintain clothing extended beyond mere laundering. It involved an entire service system. Some servants washed the linings. Others tended to air-dry fabrics. Others repaired corset frames. And still others collected every fallen bit of lace and crystal. Every stray detail had to be restored by hand and eye so that no one would suspect negligence. Even a slightly skewed embroidered button could signal decay within the household. Only when the annual ball concluded were the gowns finally removed and stored away. Yet the storage chamber was a damp wooden rack where dust settled thickly and mold quietly thrived, awaiting the next great wash. Dust, others, and the fear of revealing secrets hovered over every seam. That is the portrait of the past, where extravagant attire was never truly cleansed, only restored to brilliance with a fine veil of dust. The chasm between exterior splendor and interior reality was vast, exposing the very essence of repression in Victorian society. One might appear flawlessly magnificent, but within, the price paid was a multitude of silent sufferings. And that is the story of gowns that were never washed, where the stench and secrets of the body lay buried under a layer of talcum powder, forming an impenetrable curtain. For in that world, the purity of appearance mattered above all else, even above a woman's right to cleanliness and comfort. Now, we step out of the palace's sealed confines to witness a completely opposite physiological scenario, the bowed submission in the wind-swept gardens of Victoria. While women silently performed magic on their bodies' needs in the darkness of the private retiring room, gentlemen strolled through the dew-drenched flower beds, unabashedly relieving themselves against railings or beneath ancient trees without so much as a rebuke. The distinction was not biological. All of us must answer nature's call after a long interval, but a matter of social power. Men inherently enjoyed public space, while women were stripped of the right to acknowledge their own bodies. If a lady left a droplet of urine or menstrual residue on a velvet bench during an outdoor soiree, scandal could haunt her for life, even leading to clan ostracism. The force of that invisible pressure was more terrifying than any physical violence. To subjugate women, no lashes or leg irons were needed, just a refined etiquette order to make them police themselves. Victorian women learned silence as a survival skill, contracting their pelvic muscles to hold back flow, stepping ever so lightly when nature called. Though their bodies roiled within, they maintained a graceful posture. Bowing in utter quiet, it was a theatre of oppression where elegance and self-control reigned supreme, and the most natural urges were condemned to invisibility. The consequence was that women gradually lost sovereignty over their own bodies. They internalized fear as instinct, fear of odors, fear of stains showing, fear of being deemed unchaste. Every step was laced with anxiety about discovery. Every bending to relieve oneself was a silent battle, passed down from one generation to the next. This lesson of silence became an invisible inheritance. Mothers taught daughters to maintain control. Grandmothers whispered secret tips to stifle the flow. Thus, society continued to operate by this unseen script. Women braced themselves in enforced silence, while men freely experienced physiological needs as though no barrier existed. The royal garden was originally designed as a backdrop for ceremony and authority. Rose-clad fences, velvet benches lining the paths, lush grass, lawns, all flaunted opulence. Yet few realized that beneath the pines and behind the rose bushes, men discreetly unburdened themselves. While women could only dream of a solitary moment in a hidden retiring room, this was not a matter of convenience, but of power. Public space granted to some and denied to others, not until the very end of the century. When a handful of sanitation reforms emerged, did women dare venture into shared facilities, yet typically only in the early morning when foot traffic was low. At late-night balls, they still hovered awkwardly, both resisting urges and twisting in their corsets to restrain any flow. The necessity of split drawers or a chamber urinal remained too onerous. Public space treated a woman's needs as an alien privilege she was not entitled to claim. From this we see that silence about bodily needs was not respect, but a subtle tool of oppression. Victorian society built an invisible rule-book. Only what could not be seen was permitted to exist. Women learned to conceal every trace, while men frolicked outside as though no rules bound them. Compared to today, with public restrooms, gender signer, and privacy regulations, Victorian women paid a steep price. They endured not only physical pain, but also the burden of shame, loneliness, and the powerlessness of having their basic humanity erased. Only after a long journey of women's rights activism did this script finally break. They demanded access to public facilities, the right to speak about bodily needs, and support for hygiene. But before those reforms arrived, Victorian women lived in an age of secret relief, a dark chapter worth remembering, so that we may better appreciate the value of equality and bodily freedom today. And that is the portrait of bowed submission in the windswept garden, where power needed no lash, only a set of rituals to shape people, where humiliation and fear became instinct. Now, having uncovered the dramatic performances on the surface, let us wade into the underworld of Victorian attire, where the true underwear concealed every bodily secret and the silent labour of the ladies' maids. Beneath the lavish lace overlays lay coarse layers of linen and numerous thick petticoats, serving as damp repositories for sweat, menstrual blood, urine, and even traces of excrement. These heavy fabrics could not be laundered gently like modern undergarments. They were scrubbed against the basin's floor and hand-washed in scalding water hot enough to cause burns if accidentally touched using coarse soap bars. The entire washing process took place in a dank, fly-infested cellar, where the stench of bodily waste rose suffocatingly. This primitive underwear laundering was by no means work for a noble mistress. She simply donned her refreshed outer gown, while a team of devoted maids knelt or stood for hours, dunking each swatch of fabric into the scrubbing tub and wringing out each bundle of petticoats until exhaustion. Whenever one layer emerged, another maid immediately took its place, ensuring that not a single damp thread touched the overgarments above. Behind the royal attire's glittering facade, those hidden underlayers alone endured the body's true ravages. The lingering stench, moist residue, menstrual stains, and excrement. All were buried beneath the outer dress by the maid's silent toil. They worked continuously without pause, for a single scarcely dried petticoat or a whiff of odour would trigger an unclean alarm, threatening the family's honour. Only once the undergarments were spotless, bone dry, and scented with starch or talcum powder, was the lady permitted to don her grand outer robe. This served as the clearest testament to beauty built upon another's labour. Every graceful step, every sweeping turn on the ballroom floor relied upon the countless silent hours of anonymous hands worn raw by soap suds and basin scrubbing. This reality reveals that Victorian women were not seen as subjects with rights to their own bodies. They could not attend to their basic needs themselves, but depended entirely on others' labour. Under the pressure to preserve an impeccable image, women lost independence and became decorative dolls, clothed in meticulously served garments. Any discomfort, odor, or bodily secret they experienced could not be managed personally. It had to be handled by someone else. In wealthy households, the number of maids could reach into the dozens, one laundering the coarse underravelings, another washing petticoats, a third drying fabrics, a fourth layering petticoats, and finally one dusting them with talcum powder for fragrance. All this occurred in a separate laundry chamber, far from the mistress's quarters, so that scrubbing sounds and foul smells would not invade the formal spaces. The maids worked with no breaks, resting only when all necessary undergarments for the next gown were ready. Contrary to the notion that maids performed only simple tasks, caring for Victorian undergarments required skill and experience, Each maid had to measure the proper soap quantity, regulate the water temperature, and apply just the right scrubbing force to remove stains without damaging the fabric's weave. They exchanged secret recipes for preserving linen's durability, preventing petticoats from shrinking, and removing stubborn spots without fading embroidery. All this knowledge existed solely in their memories, never recorded or acknowledged, gradually fading into obscurity. At times, to avoid fabric damage, they applied natural enzymes or specialized starch to stain spots, letting it settle for hours before a gentle brushing. They also maintained corsets and petticoat frames, oiling steel bones to prevent rust and inspecting lacing cords. Undergarment service became a clandestine craft, meticulous and arduous, demanding robust health and keen eyesight. Meanwhile, the lady of the house merely stepped out in her flawless attire, seated in a chair, borne on a sedan chair, or mounted on a grand throne, uttering soft words and receiving endless praise. Few realized that to achieve this perfection, an entire team of maids sacrificed their hours, health, and privacy to keep each concealed layer immaculate. This image raises the question: if beauty is built on another's sweat and labor, can it truly be beauty? Victorian women, cloaked in outer layers of lace, were the visible face of power, while the maids formed the silent soul sustaining that power. And that is the portrait of hidden underwear and the silent labor of the ladies' maids, where outward splendor is maintained through silent toil and where the fundamental right to one's own body is denied. As if one's right to self-care does not exist. In this story, we see not only the suffering of the noble women, but also feel the invisible burdens borne by the women working behind the glory. Now, having peeled back the damp secrets hidden beneath the lace and linen layers, let us turn our attention to the most rudimentary hygiene tools of Victorian women, an era when modern toilet paper was but a distant luxury. Before the advent of industrial toilet paper, people resorted to every available natural material to cleanse themselves after relieving their bowels or bladder. Dried corn cobs saved after the kernels were eaten were reused as a kind of natural brush. Scrap cloth pieces, brittle leaves, straff, and even seashells served the same purpose. Despite the risks of abrasion or contamination, in some wealthier households, a more refined approach appeared in the form of a sponge affixed to a wooden handle, soaked in vinegar or salt water to neutralize odors before reuse. This practice was both unsanitary and painful. A damp sponge quickly fostered mold, leading to infections. Straw and leaves could scratch the sensitive skin, causing dermatitis or worse. Even the humble corn cob was far from sterile, carrying bacteria from previous tasks directly into intimate areas. Each session of cleansing was a fraught struggle between a basic human necessity and the fear of medical repercussions. True privacy was an utter luxury. Many homes possessed only a single bucket or basin hidden behind a thin curtain in a dim corner of the kitchen or backyard. The entire family, father, mother, children, and even lodgers used the same basin in rotation, silently hoping no one else would witness their ordeal. The creak of a wooden stool and the sound of ragged breathing echoed softly. Yet no one dared to speak of it. It was not until the end of the 19th century, with the first stirrings of a toilet paper industry, that the very first paper rolls appeared. At first, these remained a preserve of the affluent city dwellers. Paper was expensive, scarce, and distribution networks were virtually non-existent. It would take many more decades before toilet paper became commonplace among the middle and working classes. Prior to that time, generations of women, children, and the elderly endured this daily physiological violence without complaint. The hushed sighs of sharp discomfort, the stinging itch, and the lingering stench clinging to their garments became silent hauntings. No tears, no whispered confessions, only resigned silence. Etiquette and social pressure had trained women into silent vampires. They mastered the art of stifling any sound or facial expression during cleansing. A mother taught her daughter to stay silent, relying on the veil of darkness and praying that someone had already emptied the basin. Women were not permitted to exist with normal bodies and natural needs. This account of Victorian hygiene tools reveals that women lost not only health and dignity, but also the basic right to bodily autonomy. They suffered in silence, while the grand world outside carried on with its glittering balls, sparkling chandeliers, and public spaces reserved for only half of humanity. Now, having drawn back the sumptuous curtain of the banquet hall and its glittering evening gowns, let us stroll down the cobbled streets of old London, an age when the city was the most grandiose open sewer in the world. Long before flush toilets and pipes, in bygone days, refuse and human waste poured directly into open gutters running alongside the cobblestone roads. Whenever people needed to relieve themselves, they did not wait for a public facility, but went wherever they could, from a dark corner in a poor household to a private chamber of the upper class, differing only in that the latter was more cleverly concealed. That flow carried the unmistakable stench of feces, urine, and unmasked body odors, creating the characteristic aroma of one of Europe's most prosperous cities. The chamber pot, a lidded ceramic or metal basin, was placed in every nook, under beds, behind heavy drapes. With a pot at hand, one could answer nature's call, in an instant hardly genteel, but at least avoiding the freezing cold outdoors. In households too poor to afford even a single pot, a family member had to venture into the night, shivering and ashamed, to relieve themselves in the open air. In wealthy homes, the chamber pot was ingeniously hidden inside antique chairs beneath a plush velvet cushion, or within a small table with a secret compartment. Each evening, a maid donned gloves and stifled her disgust as she removed the pot, emptied its contents into a bucket destined for the street scavengers, and then scrubbed the vessel until it gleamed. No one ever witnessed these tasks, for the maid's bearing had to remain perfectly upright, her smile unfaltering. Despite the cloying stench that enveloped her, even the Queen could not escape this universal need. She differed only in the care with which it was concealed. Her chamber pot resided in a private boudoir, hidden behind an embroidered screen of nightingales and roses, and shrouded by a gilded side table. A maid dared enter only when summoned, gently handing the pot to Her Majesty before retreating silently, long before anyone might suspect a thing. By contrast, at the city walls of London, where commoners dwelt, foul odours clung to passers-by's clothing. The dark, sewage-filled gutters embraced the pavement's edge, sometimes spilling over to wet the soles of shoes. Pedestrians had to tiptoe around the waste, yet the stench followed every step. Who remembers that this city once smelled of coal smoke and the briny breath of the River Thames? Today, that memory seems lost. Without a closed sewer system, most people could never rest assured of basic cleanliness. Children played all day in puddles, formed beneath downspouts, coming into direct contact with bacteria from human waste. The elderly shuffled along, leaning on sticks to find a place to rest. And sometimes they had no choice but to endure until they located a chamber pot. Then generations passed. Horse-drawn carriages gave way to the rumble of steam-powered wheels. And in the late 19th century, the first sewer pipes began to appear. Flush toilets emerged in some affluent districts, while the vast majority of residents had to wait many more years. Suddenly, the most prized seat was no longer a velvet-upholstered bench with a secret compartment, but a pristine porcelain commode whose gentle flush sent away all odours. Yet in the memories of those who lived before the era of pipes, the stench of feces and urine remained a haunting spectre. They recalled longing for the day when street gutters would be covered, and rainwater and waste carried away into darkness rather than stagnating against walls. Night after night, the soft rustle of chamber pot contents and the trickle of water created a wordless soundtrack to old London life. Now, as we step into the modern world, we easily forget that history, automatic flush toilets, soft toilet paper rolls, bidets, and locked stall doors are taken for granted. Yet precisely because of that dark past, we understand the value of these conveniences today. Each time we press the flush valve, that we not only wash away waste but also liberate our spirits from centuries of shame and fear. And it is from those scenes that we fully appreciate the moment we step into our private bathroom, slam the door behind us, take a deep breath, and know that at last, our bodies have been set free to be themselves. As the silken garments and the painful secrets of Victorian hygiene rituals recede into history, another spectre emerges, the legacy of silence passed from mothers and grandmothers to their daughters. Over decades, silence became not merely a reflex, but an invisible asset entrenched in a woman's psyche. As a little girl, she was never taught to voice the cramps of her menstrual cycle or her natural yearning for relief. Instead, her mother covertly transmitted a manual of concealment. How to wrap a cloth strip so skillfully that no outline showed. How to sit with thighs pressed tightly to avoid damp patches. And how to utter only a word or two to mask the deep contractions within. The child grew up amid this hush, eventually convincing herself that women were forbidden to complain. Not only mothers but grandmothers and great-grandmothers whispered guidance when no one else was listening. If the pain is too much, you must endure it. Let no one know. These hush-hush admonitions were anything but casual. They were repeated like doctrine. Silent endurance is virtue. Gradually, the space for a woman's physiology was narrowed by countless invisible commandments. A lady must always be beautiful and graceful, never allowing any sign of her body to mar her elegance. Every whispered phrase became a chain that forced women into self-imposed silence. As women matured, they no longer needed external coercion to police their bodies. They did so reflexively, contracting pelvic muscles at the first urge to urinate, stifling every gasp for breath, avoiding the act of sitting to relieve themselves, and remaining ever vigilant of menstrual pain. These pangs ceased to be a universal human concern and became a personal sin. Too much pain implied insufficient virtue. A stain revealed suggested lack of refinement, and heavy breathing betrayed lack of poise. This inherited silence followed them throughout life, turning every inquiry into their bodies into a mistake, every attempt to learn into a challenge. The result was that millions of women lived in fear of expressing their needs, seeking solutions, or claiming rights over their own bodies. Reproductive health classes were deemed private matters. Books about women were hidden away in cupboards, and honest conversation became taboo, if even her peers dared not speak up. How could a daughter summon the courage to say, "Mother, I hurt so much"? Silence built a wall between them and the right to self-care. Yet this legacy of silence was not merely a burden. In moments of rupture, it could also become the impetus to break those chains. When one generation of women began to share, naming their pain and needs, the veins of secrecy were cut open, allowing hidden truths to step into the light. Trembling disclosures like, "I just changed my pad," or "I don't know what to do," spread, opening a path to learning, to solidarity, and to the demand for fairness. Today, thanks to the feminist movement and social media, many young women challenge that legacy of silence. They publicly share their menstrual experiences, post photos of their sanitary pads, or simply declare, "I need to use the restroom." They no longer wait for their mothers' or grandmothers' whispers. They seek information online, join peer support groups, and debate openly about their right to healthcare. It is through these first voices that the wall of silence is being demolished, and the legacy of secrecy is gradually replaced by one of sharing. However, the journey remains long. In many rural areas and households, the edict, "Never mention menstruation," still stands, and countless girls still conceal their sanitary pads in their backpacks to avoid detection. The legacy of silence still snakes through every corner of culture and every home, Only when each woman realizes that she is not alone, that her pain is not a private tragedy, but a chapter in the shared history of humanity, will this legacy of silence truly be erased. When the values of silent, graceful, enduring women became the hallmark of the Victorian era in London, they were swiftly exported across the British Empire's colonies, from distant India to the shores of Canada, from the wilds of Australia to the continent of Africa. The colonial authorities understood that by assimilating women's lifestyles to Western norms, they could more easily maintain social order and reinforce their power. In every colony, the ideal femininity was sown through countless channels, from fashion-puffed skirts, tightly laced corsets, and rudimentary split drawers to etiquette manuals, courtship rituals, and even through the convent schools established by the English. In wealthy Indian households, royal women learned to don the kingdom's sumptuous frocks, cinch their waists in stiff corsets to enhance their figure, and conceal their physiological suffering beneath layers of split drawers. In Canada, mothers sent their daughters to girls' schools that taught strict decorum, to fall silent when feeling unwell, force a smile through menstrual cramps, and never utter so much as a hint of discomfort. In Australia, where women had to battle both the harsh outback sun and maintain an image of refinement, corsets and split drawers, too, became indispensable. They mastered graceful postures for discreet relief, and the art of bowing silently through sudden pains. In Africa, even though indigenous women traditionally wore minimal attire, or none at all, they felt compelled to adopt corsets, hoopskirts, and split drawers to prove their civilized virtue. Missionaries, clergy, and colonial officials all insisted that only women who endured in silence deserved the role of mothers of the nation. Thus, the culture of silence spread globally, becoming a legacy not just of the English, but of the entire Western world. For more than a century, femininity was defined by invisible chains. Strength had to be hidden, pain stifled, and physiological needs masked as state secrets. Every natural expression of the body was condemned as impertinent, contrary to decency. Mothers and teachers repeatedly reminded young women, a lady must remain graceful. She cannot allow her body to mar her elegance. And yet it was precisely through this widespread diffusion that the 20th century feminist movement realized the need to break these bonds for women everywhere. The first acts of resistance took place on the printed page. Pioneering women writers in England, the United States, Canada, India, and beyond began to critique the tyranny of corsets, the folly of split drawers, and the powerlessness of enforced silence. Medical journals exposed the harm caused by constrictive clothing and crude split drawers, analyzing their destructive impact on both physical and mental health. When schoolgirls at boarding institutions formed secret discussion circles, they shared confidences, compiled homemade self-care guides, and passed along improvised sanitary cloths. That discourse spread like wildfire, awakening communal awareness of physiological needs and the right to care. The movement's crescendo came in the suffrage protests. Women proudly marched with banners through the streets of London, Montreal, and Bombay, demanding recognition as full citizens with freedom of speech and bodily autonomy. Gradually, corsets were loosened, outdated split drawers disappeared, and the lessons of silence became mere anecdotes. Girls' schools revised their curricula to include sex education as a formal subject. Women's training manuals no longer taught how to hide menstrual blood, but how to understand and care for your body. Medical science advanced. Industrial sanitary pads were invented, and flush toilets and sewer systems spread across the globe. All these developments testified to the revolution that shattered the legacy of silence. Yet the journey was neither easy nor swift. In many remote colonies, the legacy of silence remained strong. In rural India and African villages, the menstruation was still unmentionable. and bridal rights demanded that a pregnant bride remain utterly silent. The struggle continues today, as women worldwide still fight for the right to bodily education, safe sanitation, and freedom to speak openly about physiological needs. Thus, the Victorian legacy of silence became a target for overthrow. It reminds us that every time a woman is free to name her pain, to voice her needs, or to rage against injustice, she fulfills a mission to liberate that legacy, spreading the ideals of equality and wholeness. That revolution, honor not mere etiquette, but humanity's most natural demands. Only then can the true meaning of femininity be restored, not confined in silence, but courageous in voice. Now, when you step into the bathroom, slam the door behind you, and savor that private moment accompanied by the gentle rush of a flushing toilet. Remember that behind this convenience lies centuries of women's bodily liberation. The first flush toilet appeared in the mid-19th century, but at that time it was a luxury reserved for mansions and palaces. Sewer networks were incomplete. Many streets still drained open gutters, and ordinary people relied on chamber pots. Only when underground pipes were laid throughout major cities, London, Paris, and New York, did the flush toilet become widespread. Each time you press the flush lever, you inherit the achievements of sewer workers, microbiology engineers, and public health reformers who fought to prove that sending waste into pipes was safer than letting it stagnate at your doorstep. Industrial toilet paper also emerged in the late 19th century, initially serving only the upper classes. Fragile rolls were displayed in carved wooden holders, used exclusively at refined afternoon teas. It was not until manufacturers developed mass printing methods and grocery stores sold inexpensive rolls that toilet paper invaded every neighborhood, reaching the working class. Every soft roll you use today contains an optimal formula for strength, absorbency, and water solubility, a result of countless experiments with wood fiber blends and bonding agents led by pioneering female chemists. Sanitary pads began as oversized cloth scraps, hand-washed and secretly air-dried, then reused month after month. By the mid-20th century, pads had been refined into compact, multi-layered products with leak-proof backings and adhesive wings to secure them to undergarments. The real breakthrough came with disposable pads. Women no longer had to launder cloth until it frayed. They could discard a pad after 8 to 12 hours of use. The invention of the tampon, and later the menstrual cup, further expanded choices and improved life quality for millions. Absorbent underwear also represented a major advance, from simple cotton briefs to high-tech fabrics, antibacterial nanofibers, and superabsorbent gel cores, all designed so women could move freely without worrying about damp spots, odors, or the rustle of fabric. Every modern pair of absorbent underwear you wear stands as proof of meticulous research into women's bodily needs and habits, a thread that reaches back to days when sisters hid in silence, doing everything possible to conceal their urges or menstrual stains. However, no one can retire the fear of silence overnight. Unwritten rules and whispered instructions from mothers and grandmothers still echo in many women's minds. Don't make a fuss. Maintain your composure. Don't let anyone know. Breaking that code requires courage across generations. Earlier generations who dared speak up and demand change, and today's daughters learning not to be ashamed of their voices. When peers hesitate to speak, you must lead. Share your experiences. Introduce friends to pads or tampons. Speak up about cramps at a gathering. Even post a call for clean public restrooms on social media. The feminist movement of the late 20th century marked the explosion of this liberation process. It was no longer just about the right to vote or to education, but about the right to speak openly about one's body, to access accurate medical information, and to use appropriate sanitary facilities. Non-profits, community groups, and social media turned public sharing about menstruation into a normal act. Hashtags like #PeriodPositive, live streams titled Ask a doctor about reproductive health, and videos such as A Day with a Tampon. All these efforts helped erase shame and restore bodily autonomy. Thanks to these invisible efforts, women everywhere today can freely knock on restroom doors at any hour, choose tampons or pads at will, proudly display their new absorbent underwear, and buy toilet paper without hesitation. The bathroom has become a sacred haven where we can cry, laugh, and breathe easy through cramps or urinary urges. Modern conveniences not only improve quality of life, but also affirm the value of every voice raised. Each woman who speaks out, who demands care, who claims her rights, continues the chain of liberation. The journey is far from over. In many rural areas and countries, sanitary facilities remain scarce, customs remain strict, and the legacy of silence still lingers. Our work goes beyond purchasing modern conveniences. It extends to remote villages advocating for safe sanitation access, teaching tampon and pad use, and supporting the construction of public restrooms. Each time you gift a friend a box of pads or a roll of soft paper, you help write the next chapter in the story of bodily liberation. So when you step out of the bathroom, look in the mirror and feel that sense of relief. Reflect on the long journey behind you, the generations who endured silence so we could have today. And remember that you, with small acts, a heartfelt conversation, a social media post, a word of encouragement, keep the flame of liberation burning, turning the right to bodily freedom into a living reality. Now, as we exuberantly celebrate civilizational progress, it is easy to forget the silent sacrifices of millions of women before us. They were not the glamorous portraits hung in galleries or the gleaming statues in museums, but rather silent warriors, enduring relentless pain and crushing humiliation day and night, simply to preserve the image of perfect beauty in society's eyes. Every graceful step and every radiant smile you see today is the fruit of countless generations' hidden struggle. Pause for a moment, look in the mirror, and admit this: your body is nothing to be ashamed of. Every damp stain, every ragged breath during menstrual cramps, every worry about odor does not diminish your worth. On the contrary, these are proof of your strength and authenticity. Share this story with your daughter so she knows that the right to speak about her physiological needs is a basic human right. Talk with your friends and colleagues so that whenever they hesitate, they will remember that silence was once a tool of oppression, and now we need no longer remain silent. Do not hesitate to talk about menstruation, about needing to use the restroom, about the discomfort of cramps, or the urge to urinate. These are not matters of poor manners. They are how you assert mastery over your own body. Write down your thoughts. Keep a menstrual diary, or simply post a short status. I am menstruating. I need the bathroom. When you dare to speak, you break down an invisible barrier and pave the way so that the next generation need not struggle alone. Physiological freedom is not only about having a flush toilet or soft toilet paper, it is a fundamental human right. The right to healthcare, the right to education about one's body, and the right to respect when expressing one's needs. Each time you enter the bathroom, close the door firmly. Take a deep breath and exhale in relief. Remember that you are enjoying the fruits of those who dared to speak out over centuries. You are not alone. You walk the path they charted. To preserve this legacy, we must act every day. When a friend feels embarrassed to buy sanitary pads, offer to go with her. When a colleague seems lost seeking a restroom, guide her. When someone says, "Don't mention that in public," remind them that sharing about our bodies is perfectly normal. Every small act, a word of encouragement, a sincere remark helps dispel prejudice and strengthen our community. Education also plays a crucial role. Encourage schools to include reproductive health education in their core curriculum so that all young people receive complete, open information. Participate in or support campaigns to build clean, safe public restrooms Stand up for anyone mocked or shamed for mentioning menstruation or sanitary needs. Only when we all join hands will the legacy of silence truly be erased. It cannot be denied that the journey remains long. In many remote regions and cultures, menstruation is still taboo. Many girls must hide their sanitary pads in backpacks to avoid discovery. Yet every story told, every voice raised, changed perception. Each woman who dares to share her story lays a brick in the wall of confidence, building a world in which the body is no longer a repository of secrets and shame. Looking back on the long path from constrictive corsets and crude split drawers to today, every step forward is a victory for humanity. Appreciate modern conveniences, self-flushing toilets, soft paper rolls, tampons, and menstrual cups. But never forget that their true value lies in the right to speak up and the right to self-care. Every time you share an experience or defend your own rights and those of others, you continue the next chapter in the liberation of the body. And finally, when you step out of the bathroom, look in the mirror once more and smile. Give thanks to the generations who chose not to remain silent. They were brave enough to endure, brave enough to speak, so that we today can stand tall with bodies fully free and deserving of respect. Carry on that journey so that the legacy of silence never descends upon any woman again. So, we have journeyed together from the splendid hoop skirts and tightly laced corsets, through the rudimentary split drawers, to modern comforts like the flush toilet, soft toilet paper, disposable sanitary pads, and tampons. In each chapter, we have seen the silent pain and steadfast struggle of women over centuries, all to win freedom over their bodies and peaceful sleep every night. Wishing you a truly restful night, dreaming of a world where every woman is respected and free to speak her bodily needs. Don't forget to click subscribe so you won't miss our newest and best videos. Sleep well, and see you in the next video.